You can see here now that the Prime Minister's plane has landed at the airport in West Palm Beach, Florida. And I can tell you, based on my reporting and reporting by our Washington correspondent, Katie Simpson, that Justin Trudeau is on that plane. He is on his way to Mar-a-Lago, where he will have dinner with President-elect Donald Trump tonight. This is something that the Prime Minister and his office sought out. They're happy that we're able to make this happen. And Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc is also part of the contingent of Canadian officials who have traveled to Florida today with the Prime Minister so that they can meet with President-elect Trump. Now, this, of course, comes in a very difficult week when Donald Trump put on his social media feeds on Monday night that he would slap a 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States from both Canada and from Mexico, unless those countries made efforts to stop the flow of people and fentanyl across their borders. This caused extreme urgency amongst the Canadian and American and Mexican business populations, and of course amongst political circles here, leading to a First Ministers meeting between the Prime Minister and Canada's premiers on Wednesday, and now this unplanned flight by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. So not unplanned, unknown flight of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc to Florida to meet with Donald Trump tonight to talk about this. Okay, lots to talk about with our party insiders. Melanie Richer, she's away this week, but she's joining us through the magic of technology. She's a former communications director for the NDP. And here with me in the studio, we got the St. FX guys, Greg McEachern, a former Liberal ministerial staffer, and Fred Delory, a former Conservative campaign manager. Okay, not really how we plan to start the show or deal with the show today, but this is what happens really in the world of news. Greg, the Prime Minister, Dom LeBlanc, I'm going to assume Katie Telford's probably there as well, the Chief of Staff. Do you know anything about this and what is going on that you can share with the class?
I don't know much more that, and I thought I was going to have a bit of a scoop until you had the confirmation that Dominic LeBlanc is with him, which I think is a smart move. Mm-hmm. I like this. It's kind of a grab the issue by the lapels, go right into, I can come up with more cliches, belly of the beast. Mm-hmm. But if you want to send a message that you're serious, this is what you do. And we know that other people have done this. We've seen media figures, politicians in the United States, politicians from other countries go there and do this directly. Smart to bring Dominic LeBlanc. The Prime Minister and Dominic go back a very long ways. And also, Trump seems to have some appreciation for family success. And you can point to Dominic's father being in Pierre Trudeau's cabinet, being the Governor General, and then Dominic, quite a successful politician on his own. I think if you're a certain Canadian Premier, you're probably happy the Prime Minister is doing this because it's going to take some of the coverage of their embarrassing behavior and initial reactions this week away. And I would just say I hope nobody is going to be stupid enough to hate this because Justin Trudeau is doing it. And if I see something about how much the flight cost or the fuel or the fact that he's going to Florida in November, wouldn't that be nice for Canadians? I bet you there is somebody stupid enough to say that. I will nominate them next week.
Well, Fred, I hope it's not you. I'm just letting you know because he's already he's thrown down the gauntlet here.
Throwing out my lines.
Look,
what I was gonna say,
yeah, exactly. But look, you can offset a bit of jet fuel against if you can get a 25% tariff threat taken care of, right? So look, he's there. Dom LeBlanc is with him. Probably the best political operator in the federal cabinet, the Minister of Janitorial Affairs. He cleans up all of the messes, and he's also in charge of the border, which is what this issue is really about. So, what do you make of this move by the Prime Minister on this Black Friday?
Yeah, it's interesting, and hopefully it's a Black Friday because of the holiday and not because of what comes out of this meeting. It's an interesting time where, Trump did this on Monday. In 5 days, it felt like Trudeau was missing in action in many ways. There was the premiers were stepping up and holding meetings, having meetings with officials in the U.S. and trying to pull something together here. And I know the Prime Minister was then pushed to have that meeting with the premiers earlier in the week. But it felt like there was a lack of leadership at the top. That we keep talking about Team Canada. There needs to be all united, all working together on this. But there's no one actually leading it. There seems to be an absence there. So him going, maybe there's something positive coming from this, and we'll have to see what comes out of this.
But Mel, I know the criticism was there didn't seem to be a frenzy of action from the federal government. But you go back to Trump 1, it was we only respond to actions, not to words, because there's so many words. Now, 25% tariff are fighting words, and you have to respond to that. I mean, what do you make of where this is now that we know that Justin Trudeau and one of his most trusted ministers are at Mar-a-Lago this evening?
Right. I think it's probably a bit of a sign of relief. To Fred's point, I think the whole week this week, folks were kind of wondering, well, what does this mean? What does it mean for our jobs? What does it mean for our supply chains that are so connected? And I think that has a lot of people worried, whether, you know, it's a worker or it's somebody running a corporation. I think folks who saw President-elect Trump's words on Monday, to your point, you know, there's a lot of words sometimes, but that would have a massive impact. And it would also have a massive impact on the United States. So what that message is, I agree, the stepping up of premiers in the contrast of not really hearing much from the federal government was perhaps, depending on which side you were, it was maybe seemed a little bit chaotic and not necessarily the approach we should be taking, but at the same time, at least it was something. So I think folks who are seeing the trip today and agree, you know, Minister LeBlanc, that was a smart person to bring, likely, but at least it's something which is good, and the fact that it wasn't publicized, probably not by accident either, probably a little bit of strategy there, which. Again, a little bit reassuring and not necessarily something that we've seen that proactive from the Prime Minister in his office as of late. So maybe a little bit of, okay, something is maybe working here that we can trust that maybe something is going on behind the scenes more than what we've seen. Yeah,
look, the radio silence could also be a condition from Team Trump too, right? We don't know yet, Greg, you know, how that all came together, and so finding out that backstory is going to be interesting. But, you know, governments have plans and governments have ideas, and then events happen. And here we are. I know they were getting ready to do a fall economic statement. We don't know when that's going to happen. 25% tariffs affect the fall economic statement quite substantially if it were to come in. We know there was discussion of a cabinet shuffle coming soon. How does this change things? I mean, what's your sense of just how greatly the return of the Trump has just changed some of the internal planning for this government?
Well, I want to be really clear, and I've been in rooms where this has been repeated off the record, where this government has been planning for both scenarios, a Harris win or a Trump win. And I know people, I've spoken to people who are not necessarily big fans of this government, but will confirm that, have been consulted. So there was preparation on that. But the old, I think it's Mike Tyson's line about everybody's got a plan to get a punch in the face. You know, the 25% tariff was a bit of a punch in the face, but you have to also weigh it that it was on Truth Social, which I don't even know how to find. I think it was late in the day. So, you know, how seriously do you take this? But, you know, yes, I think time passes differently, you know, for this PMO. And to Fred and Mel's point about what they saw.
That didn't sound like a compliment, Fred.
I didn't mean it as one.
Okay, I'm just making sure I didn't misunderstand.
Yeah. We'll be clear. Yeah. But the thing is, the vacuum on that was filled by premiers saying a couple of really dumb things. You know, Doug Ford sounded hurt that, you know, like it was a family member stabbed me in the heart. I don't think a lot of Canadians, you know, like approve that. I note the At Issue panel last night talked about how Premier Chemtrails, Premier Smith, did kind of a bit of a U-turn on, you know, from her earlier
also not statements. A compliment, but go on.
You know, and I saw a headline that said, you know, that she sides with President Trump. And I think there's an issue where we have gotten so used to politicians ratcheting things down, or ratcheting things up, taking the level of discourse down, that it's a standard where you can just, you know, blame Trudeau, kick Trudeau for everything. But when you automatically do that and you're siding with another nation that's really going to hurt us economically, I think there was a bit of a record scratch moment there for a lot of the premiers.
Well, look, there was a lot of stuff that a lot of things were said this week, right? You know, Doug Ford saying it was insulting to compare us to the Mexicans, which a lot of people said, where are you going with that, Premier Ford? But, you know, Fred, Wab Kinew made a very pragmatic point that we're not going to argue our way out of this. So the country's got to do something to satisfy Donald Trump, or we're going to live with an unhappy Donald Trump. And Andrew Furey, who was on the show this week, the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, basically said it's hard to have a plan for chaos. Because all along we were talking about a 10% tariff, maybe a 20%, and suddenly it's 25%, and it's linked to fentanyl. So, I mean, what did you make of the way the first ministers conducted themselves leading up to this plane ride to Mar-a-Lago?
Right, well, they were filling a vacuum that was created by the federal leadership being absent for the last number of days. And it's funny, we were talking about, you know, the Liberals having a plan. They haven't had a plan in years. You know, they've been basically, the NDP has been driving the policy, and they've been just running the day-to-day affairs of government. There's been no planning here. The GST thing, well, I know we'll talk later on that. The just came out of nowhere.
It's like the NDP became management. You know, they became the management class.
They're the chairs, they're the board of directors of the government. It's a strange thing, world we live in Canada right now in our political system. But the premiers were stepping up. They weren't getting anything from the government. They're worried about this. It's going to impact industries across this country, and they're hearing it from their stakeholders. They're hearing it from their constituents, and they need to step in and fill the void.
But nothing justifies, you know, at the Canadian border, nothing justifies a 25% tariff. I mean, the data of it all is so small. So, like, you know, I know there's some frustration even amongst at the First Minister's table, at the Premier's level, and up, about what Danielle Smith said in particular when she said, oh, Donald Trump's right on a lot of this stuff. I'm like, well, is he? You know, about, you know, it's up to the U.S. to stop people from illegally entering their country. Canada can intercept some drugs because they're illegal on both sides of the border. But people moving around, that's not the Canadian, they didn't stop their people at Roxham Road, right? The U.S. didn't.
Right. It was a big problem when we had people coming into Quebec through there. And, you know, that was a major hole that took forever to plug. So there's no question, you know, there's premiers out there talking, and we may not like what they say, we may like what some of them say, but when there's an absence of leadership at the top, that's what's going to happen. If the Prime Minister is presenting a plan and leading the way, I'm sure people will follow if it's a good plan and if they can buy into it. One of the problems is Trudeau has such a terrible relationship with so many premiers that it's going to be a major challenge for him to do this.
Well, I mean, that's a two-way street, right, as well, in a lot of cases, right? I mean, to be fair. And that's what I wonder, and Mel, I'll get to you in a second, but Fred, like, if you have a plan, knowing how bad the relationship is with some of the premiers, can you lay it all out to them, even in private, and not have it get out and leak out and compromise your position? You know?
Look, I think the premiers are very worried about what the impact is going to be on their province, and I think there will be a team approach if leadership presents a good plan. But that has to happen. And again, this is not a, you know, we talk about the Liberals. I don't think there's much of a plan here. I think they are on the seat of their pants. They've been doing it for years, and we'll have to wait and see what comes out.
Yeah, well, look, there has been a bit of a scattershot approach to things. Mel, we were going to talk in depth about the GST stuff, which we may not even get to now because of what's going on here. But, you know, what is your sense? Like, I know publicly they weren't saying much, but, like, you know, the Team Canada thing was relaunched back at the cabinet retreat in Montreal, and people have been making trips. I don't know how close they got to Donald Trump's orbit, though clearly they'll be in it tonight. I mean, the lack of public demonstration of a plan doesn't necessarily mean there has been no plan. I mean, what's your sense of it?
I guess I'm of two minds on that, right? Like, I do media training all the time, and I tell people no comment is a comment. You're choosing not to say something, right? And at a time where you're seeing an announcement like that, and I hear all the points of, you know, these are just words until they become actions. But that's pretty terrifying to a lot of folks who either rely on work, rely on, again, those supply chains. We're so interconnected that it's really hard to understand for a lot of what we rely on where it starts and where it stops. So that's pretty worrisome to a lot of folks. So I do think that there is a way to talk about process. There's a way to talk about some of the things that you're doing without, you know, telling all of your secrets publicly, or without upsetting, you know, the incoming American administration. But there has to be something that you say. And kind of on the flip side, the premiers filling up the vacuum, I think somebody needed to tell people something. The only problem is, you know, it's kind of popular sometimes to punch down, and I think the trend of wanting to dunk on Trudeau or to you know, say something negative just to say something negative because it's popular to do right now. We've seen this a little bit. You know, we talked about it on this show as it relates to India and other things. And on this stuff, it's too important, right? It almost feels a little bit. What's the word I'm looking for? Like you're working against Canadians, you're working against Canada because you don't necessarily like the Prime Minister, which I don't think is helpful either. So I think I think it's just super important to be thoughtful in the way that we're having these conversations on something that will have a real impact on people.
Yeah, I mean, Mel's got a point there, Greg, in that, you know, just because someone's low in the polls, it doesn't make their behavior any better or any worse. If they're high in the polls, you know, the polls, public opinion polls are one thing, you know, a standard of behavior and performance should be sort of removed from that. But, you know, it touches on a challenge that they have now that they didn't have in Trump 1. Because back then, early in the mandate, high political capital, high public opinion, in that, no, I don't mean like in voting attention, but the country trusted that government to deal with it. I don't know if they have that right now, based on where things are, and the politics of the country are far more fractured and angry, and this is going to be an enormous challenge for them to navigate. Yeah,
when they dealt with Trump the first time, they had help from across the spectrum, Ronna Ambrose, James Moore, Brian Topp. Thank goodness Canada had Brian Mulroney at that time. I have to, I don't like to say this, but, some of the people that could be involved that might be able to help with this, they might have second thoughts about assisting a very unpopular administration if their political careers are not complete. And that may not mean that they want to run again. They may want to advise a government. They want a future government. And to Mel's point, it's really easy. It's really easy to punch down on this, but at the end of the day, you're just punching yourself in the face if it's going to hurt your country. And if you're a premier of a province or you want to be prime minister, it's the people you represent that will be hurt, not your political party.
So, Fred, on that, and sorry, if you see me on my phone at home, I'm not rudely ignoring our guests. I love this. I'm trying to find out stuff. So I'm trying to work as a reporter while also being a talking head house cat here. Fred, I just wonder your thoughts on that. Like, the Team Canada approach is what everyone talks about, and it's a little bit of a cliche in some sense, but it's an absolute necessity when you're dealing with a country as powerful as the United States and a president as unpredictable as Donald Trump, right? So, like, do you think the political climate is such that it can happen in a truly meaningful way? Like, maybe they're slow out of the gate, but they've had the first minister's meeting. He's going to have dinner at Mar-a-Lago, so there's forward momentum here. Do you think everyone can pull together? I'm not yet sure.
It's going to be incredibly challenging. Go back to Trump 1.0 that we talked about. He was a year in, Trudeau was, when Trump was elected. He was over 50% at different times in that year in the polls. He had the political capital. He had a fresh government. When you're in government as long as they have been, 9 years, all you do is collect enemies. It happens to everyone who's at every level who's been in for a long time. And that's where they are right now. There's a lot of bad will with the premiers. It's a lot of broken trust. There's a lot of issues there. It's hard. They all do have to get together. I do hope that, the Prime Minister shows leadership on this and that it's a good plan and the premiers buy in.
But I want to push back. It's not just, like, let's be fair. Some of our premiers have said some really dumb things, not just on this, but, on climate change, other things. When it's broken trust, I don't think sometimes there was trust or good faith to begin with. And I think, it's great and easy to call out the Prime Minister, but at the same time, if we're going to be really fair and have a smart conversation, and what I saw in the last couple of days was, some smart reporting, some smart journalists, some smart columnists actually do what David just said about, challenged Trump's assumptions about the border, about fentanyl, about guns, and, Canada versus the United States or Canada versus Mexico on this. So if we dumb this down and make it very, very political and just say, the premiers have been hard done by, well, then they get a pass and they're not being accurate, and the people they represent are not getting an accurate story.
Well, I don't think that's what they're. It's not about. It's not about them dumbing it down and talking that way. It's about coming up with a plan and showing, we've got this. We're going to.
Well, I think the first plan is 25% serious, or was this a post?
I mean, who knows?
That's
right?
where they have to start.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And hopefully that's what the Prime Minister and Dominic LeBlanc are going to find out.
Yeah, and look, part of the problem, Mel, is, as Wab Kinew says, because I think he kind of nailed it on this. He's like, we're not going to be able to argue our way out of this, right? Like, Trump is talking about tariffs, even though every economist on earth, just about, and a bunch of his key business leaders are saying, you're going to ruin your own economy if you do this. Walmart is warning they're going to have to raise prices all across the United States of America, not in Canada and Mexico necessarily, but that'll happen here, obviously, if Donald Trump goes ahead with his plan. And that is just going to start hurting his own people. But it's kind of what he promised, it's kind of what he believes, and it's kind of where we are. So no matter what the facts of it are on the ground, there has to be a response in some way that satisfies his instinct that the border is a problem, even if the data says it isn't. Right, Mel?
Yeah, and it's hard. how do I say this without sounding crass? But it's hard to talk facts when facts aren't really being believed, right? So I think some of the strategies that we saw last time hopefully will be employed again this time. The speaking up from those different state legislators of this is exactly how you're going to be impacting our folks, our people, if you go ahead on this, and some of those business folks too, pointing to the supply chain and pointing to the fact that you're building a car. Does it start here in the U.S.? Does it go next to Canada? Our supply chains are so interconnected, particularly on those border towns, that it really is hard sometimes to figure out where it starts and where it ends. So all of those impacts, hopefully that kind of strategy of, I think I saw something about how Trump was talking about how tariffs needed more PR or something, but it's almost like you need to explain on the other side, right? Like you also need to talk about how the real impacts of what those will look like, not just on the U.S., a big trading partner for the U.S., but on American people. So hopefully some of those strategies that we saw deployed last time will be deployed again this time. And there's always that really powerful voices from those state legislators. So hopefully those same kind of tactics, and that's a really good place for premiers to also be spending time doing and having those conversations. So hopefully we see that both from obviously the Prime Minister and the federal government, from folks on the team that they assemble, whether that's at the province level, the business level, at the workforce level, but definitely saying that message and sharing that with folks who can add that pressure stateside will be really important.
Okay, I just want to catch you up on where we are. You can see there a live shot on the side of the screen of Mar-a-Lago. And we're showing you that because Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made an unannounced and unpublicized trip there today. His plane has landed at the airport in West Palm Beach. He's brought with him some members of his senior staff. I'm assuming Katie Telford, the Chief of Staff, is there. And also Dominic LeBlanc, the Minister of Public Safety. And they will be going to Mar-a-Lago for a dinner and a meeting tonight with President-elect Donald Trump. This, of course, comes 5 days after Donald Trump on his social media feeds posted a threat to impose a 25% tariff on all products coming from Canada into the United States or from Mexico into the United States unless Canada and Mexico made significant changes to enforcement at their borders to deal with what Trump says is a dangerous national security threat in the form of human beings and fentanyl flowing across the borders. Now, there is a significant volume of both people and drugs coming into the United States at a southern border. This is a well-documented problem. There has been an increase in people from Canada into the United States, but it only amounts to about 7% of the contacts that U.S. border officials report in their data. And in terms of drug flows, they have only seized about 43 pounds of fentanyl coming from Canada to the United States, compared to more than 22,000 pounds of fentanyl coming from Mexico into the United States. So it's a symmetrical threat to Canada and Mexico in terms of the 25% tariff for asymmetrical problems. And now Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of the country, has gone to speak with the President-elect, clearly to get him to change his mind. So, Greg, look, we've talked about what the Prime Minister is going to do. We have a reporter friend, Josh Wingrove from Bloomberg, who is assigned from the White House pool to be at the President-elect. We're hoping to connect with him in just a little bit to find out what's going on there. We talked about the Prime Minister, the Premiers. Let's talk about the opposition parties for a second. I struggle to see a world where Pierre Poilievre asks for a spot on Team Canada or is offered a spot on Team Canada. What do you expect? He is the most influential politician in Canada right now in terms of driving political narrative and conversation. I don't think there's any real dispute of that. What does the Conservative leader, his caucus, and he personally need to do in the next little while to help with this? I'm assuming he wants to help avoid a 25% border tariff. What can they do?
Well, I referenced earlier that the premiers kind of did a U-turn in terms of the ones who were kind of initially supportive or agreeing with Trump. They, I think, got a message really quickly that the people who put them in power weren't really happy with that response. So what the leader of the opposition has to do is figure out if he wants to stay with the tone that he always has, everything's up for criticism. Is the calculus for him that there is some downside if the Conservatives are seen not to be supportive of this? And I mean, if I was advising him, which of course that would never happen, but he's got somebody in his caucus like Ed Fast. who's a old hand,
former trade minister,
you know, and considered to be, you know, well liked, and I'm probably hurting his career right now, but well liked on all sides of the.
He's retiring. He's not excellent.
But well liked on all sides of the House. If you wanted to do some sort of gesture that you are, you know, a Canadian first, there are a couple of people. Randy Hoback has been working on Canada, U.S. What the review of the deal would look like. There are some people there, some smart people in his caucus that he could rely on.
So, Fred, what do you think? The response we saw when Pierre Poilievre, I think it was Tuesday, I think it was in Halifax still for the Nova Scotia election. I watched it on News Network. He came out and said we need a nonpartisan response to this, and proceeded to say that the nonpartisan response was end your emissions cap, cut the carbon tax, just basically implement Pierre Poilievre's policy.
It was policy decision, yeah.
But like, I get it. Everything is a political opportunity, but this is a governing situation now, right? And this is where I remember when he shook Joe Biden's hand. He said, "I'm the leader of." I believe it was Her Majesty's loyal opposition at the time, because here the opposition is loyal. How does a loyal opposition show support for a prime minister they don't like at a time of great need like this?
Well, it's interesting, you know, to that point, the role is to be the critic to the government, to hold them to account, to challenge them on what they're pushing out and what their positions are. In this case, like, you know, we talk about could they work together. There's no way the Liberals are going to be open to it, and there's no way the Conservatives are going to be open to it. There's no collaboration here between that. I just don't see that happening. We are also going into an election year. This is not like Trudeau, go back to Trump 1.0. We talked about he had 3 years of runway before the next election, and again was very popular. He's now at the, you know, could
be 3 months, right? Like we just don't know.
The polls in the next few months. Yeah. So this, you know, and at the same time, we have to look at our own country in terms of the election and what we're talking about to everyday Canadians as well. So it is going to be, such an incredibly complicated time for the government and the official opposition going into this, where a new U.S. government is taking hold.
But how do you do the calibration there, though, Fred, between politics and, you know, for lack of a better word, patriotism, right? Because whatever you think of this prime minister, he is the prime minister at a time where you need the prime minister to succeed. Because if this fails between now and January 20th, what a mess, right? Now, I know they try to press everything for their advantage. The Conservatives have been, you know, Pierre Poilievre is the apex predator of the House of Commons. And I don't say that as an insult. This is what he does. He goes in there and he, you know, he leverages every opportunity for his political advantage. But if he undermines the prime minister on the Canada-U.S. front, he undermines the country on the Canada-U.S. front between now and January 20th, because that's the deadline, right?
But it's about putting forward what he would be doing as prime minister. It's not about undermining the current prime minister. We have, in Canada, I've seen the polls where the majority of Canadians, most Canadians, think Pierre Poilievre is the best to take on Trump.
Sure.
We're in the situation, we're going soon. I think we can all, you know, we're not all going to admit, I'll say Conservatives are going to form government in the next year. Let's get this over with. Let's go now. Let's have this election. So then we can have like maybe the Liberals will win. Maybe they'll pull it out and they'll be in power, and then they can go and deal with this new administration if they're reelected. But hanging us out here for a year with a lame duck government does not help our cause.
Right, but you know, Mel, on this, like the deadline is January 20th. That's the inauguration. There is, like, I know the Conservatives have a rather smartly crafted confidence vote coming next week using Jagmeet Singh's words against him. You know, all the stuff he did when he ripped up the supply and confidence agreement. They've baked that into a confidence vote, and they're going to dare him to vote for it, though Don Davies said, we're not going to play the game, we'll vote against it. But there's unlikely to be an election between now and January 20th. If there was, it wouldn't really be over, and the transition wouldn't be complete by January 20th. So we have to, you know, you have the government you have, whether you like it or not, and you want it to work, or else the economy goes into an absolute abyss. So how do the opposition leaders, who all want to take Justin Trudeau's job, calibrate their ambitions with the necessity of working for the country right now?
Right, and I have to. You kind of have to put not that to the side, obviously, and maybe, you know, my friends in the studio, you'll call me naive for saying this, but like at a certain point, like, why is it that you've come to Ottawa? What is it that you're trying to do? Why do you want to become prime minister? You want to do those things, hopefully, because you want to make people's lives better. You have a vision of how to make our country better, and in this interim, if you're putting that at risk, I don't know. I don't think that that's a good thing, and I think we've seen the bad instinct of the Conservatives to do that the last 2 weeks. I think we saw it with the housing accelerator and saying, you know, if you're mayor in one of the seats that one of our MPs hold, you're not getting this help because we don't like the Prime Minister, fine. We saw it with the GST this week. We're apparently looking to help you with your costs, but we're going to vote against something that's going to reduce your costs. And then the same thing, like with the tariffs and the relationship with the incoming American president, you got to be careful. I hear your point, Fred, that his goal is to be oppositional and whatnot, but this is pretty important. You're not going to an election, David, to your point, before the 20th. At a certain point, there are things that you kind of need to maybe zip it a little bit or give your ideas to somebody on the side, and maybe they're not going to do that. But I think if they were wise and if the Liberals wanted to kind of put them in their place a little bit, I would see if there is that opportunity to see if there's something that they can do on the sideline, because again, this is a really important moment. It's not a moment that we can mess up, really. And if you do want to be Prime Minister, prove it, show it. You haven't really proved to us that you're a statesman, like that you make a decision in the best interests of people instead of the best interests of yourself. So I would give that for food for thought for Conservatives right now. It's kind of too important to put yourself first. Particularly, we've got 2 months.
Yeah, I mean, look, there is an opportunity here for Pierre Poilievre to show a different side of himself, depending how he approaches. But I want to show something that we think is going to happen as early as Monday, because the Conservatives do plan to try to trigger a vote of confidence next week. Their previous attempts have failed, but this one takes a different approach, as I was just saying to Mel. The Conservative motion uses the NDP leader's own words. Back in September, Jagmeet Singh said the Liberals are, quote, too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people. Can't imagine that was ever going to come back to haunt him. Now Singh will have to vote on whether he supports his own statement and whether he does not have confidence in the Liberal government. So Mel, just your thoughts quickly.
You just had to, hey?
What's that? Well,
you just had to ask this question.
Well, your thoughts on the tactic, but also in this moment, should tactics like these confidence motions be employed given what is on the table from the man in Mar-a-Lago right now?
Right. I think right now confidence motions are not the best timing. And I would also say, if you put aside a little bit what's happening south of the border, also what's happening here, the measures with the GST, I think those things are important to pass. So giving relief to folks in the next few weeks would also be important. As it relates to the motion, maybe two thoughts there. Cute writing, for sure. I like what they did there. Good news for you, David, that they watched the CBC and they took your idea and
well, it was so obvious when he said it, Mel, didn't you think?
Oh, for sure. But I also think it's kind of cute that he thinks that this is going to work. I think Jagmeet, is going to laugh it off and is going to say, we are not doing what Pierre Poilievre wants because it benefits Pierre Poilievre. We're going to do what benefits people, and this ain't it. So is it cute? Is it a moment? Fine. Is it something that people are actually paying attention to and will be trying to hold Jagmeet to account for doing when he's the one pushing for actual measures that are helping people? I don't think so.
So, Greg, what are your thoughts? I mean, the Prime Minister is in Mar-a-Lago. He's meeting with the President-elect tonight. I mean, Parliament comes back on Monday, and very likely, because they've got to get these opposition days in before they can get to things like supply, which there's $21 billion in spending for programs that are needed. Do you think these tactics, do they fit the moment right now?
Other than there was a fantastic prediction by you, my Friday boss, that this may happen. Again, it's all of a sudden this feels like it's time for an adult conversation, and we're watching schoolyard battles. And again, it really goes to a base of the party, but it also goes to a lot of Canadians that polls tell us are upset with the Prime Minister, are tired of the Prime Minister. One of the other things I find, people say that they're tuning out the Prime Minister, but also there's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction every time this government does something that the default is, it's stupid, there's a mistake, and again, like I've kind of enjoyed this conversation about the GST cut in that it's, and you see a lot of people saying this, people saying again and again, the government needs to do something, and then they do something, anything, and then it's pulled apart and and there's so much more time on this, and yes, it's the federal government than some of what the provinces have done. I noticed the Prime Minister in a press conference this week, either today or yesterday, yesterday, talked about who this was aimed at. And he said he talked to people, 26-year-old, 36-year-olds, and says, there's never anything there for me. And my, friends of mine, I'm single by choice, to be clear. It's not my choice. but my friends and I who are single, we joke about how every time there's a federal budget, there's never anything for us. And there's a lot of conversations from the NDP about the disabled and seniors, and I get that, but there are a lot of programs for those groups and other groups. There aren't a lot of programs that fit, the $250 check. And but why is the Prime Minister telling us that after the fact? Like, where was the the preamble that kind of warmed us up? This is what we're trying to accomplish here.
So, Fred, just getting back to this motion, though, right? Like, do you go ahead with that, knowing what the country is facing, knowing what the government is facing, and the time limit that you have? I mean, tactically, I assume you think they will. This will be the thing that happens next week.
The sooner Pierre Poilievre is Prime Minister and dealing with Trump, the better. He's going to be Prime Minister within the next year. He's going to win the next election. If we keep delaying this, we're putting in a lame duck government, or we have a lame duck government. It is going to there's whatever these negotiations are, we're going to go into an election eventually. It could happen in March, April, May. Now, I'm hearing the NDP are likely to support the budget, and we may be October next year. And then we're going to have a reset with a new government that then has to start afresh new. The sooner we get this over with, the better. And it's all, but it is their
He's not even president yet. Like, he hasn't even been sworn in.
Okay.
Is the calculus only
suddenly
we've taken
we
access
shouldn't
tax
just
off
stop
the table?
Trying to take the government down because there's a new president.
But is the reason now to take the government down because of President Trump? I mean, we went through an election in 1988, which was about free trade, and that year there were different times it could have been Dukakis that won, or it could have been George Herbert Walker Bush that won. But your earlier comment makes it sound like now, because of Trump, and again, there are our largest trading partner, but is now the reason to have an election because of tariffs? All of a sudden, that's the one reason why
there's been reasons
Canada needs
for
to go
months
to the polls.
and months and months that the Conservatives, since they came back in September, the House came back to try to bring this government down.
Yeah, but look, I get all of that, right? And I get why the Conservatives are doing this, and they're in the position to press their advantage. But if this confidence vote were to pass next week, the government goes into caretaker mode, and then you don't fix the border. You don't respond to Trump, and you don't do what needs to be done. And January 20th comes, and boom, there's a 25% tariff, assuming the president does what he says he is going to do, right? So in this, I'm talking about just this window to the 20th of January.
But look, there'll always be a reason or an excuse not to bring the government.
This is a pretty big one. This is half a percent. This is 5% off GDP, right? Potentially.
Trump always comes out with a big, aggressive move out of the gate. This is how, he wrote a book on this, The Art of the Deal, and then you negotiate down, you do all this. If there's an election going on in Canada over the Christmas break and into January, a new government will come in place, and I bet you Pierre Poilievre and Canadians agree with me, would be better placed to take him on. He'd be elected, I don't know the 36 days from now where that would be, but we would be transitioning into government around that time, and then we could sit down and figure out these issues.
Yeah, well, if you get an election now, you're ruining my Christmas trip home to Newfoundland and Labrador, Fred, and that
2006 was a great election. We have it over Christmas.
Yeah, it was terrible.
We beat you guys.
No.
Right.
But Tarmac blur.
But Melanie, there is this narrow window, right, where it's taking the president-elect at his word of January 20th. Make the changes I want to see, or you get the tariff. I mean, the wisdom of potentially putting the government into caretaker mode and, putting all the politicians on the campaign trail in that before this is resolved.
I also got to laugh a little bit. Sorry, Fred. My friend Fred, who said, oh, he talks big, don't worry about it. But this is so important. He's doing this really important thing, so we need Poilievre right now. Like, I feel like those are two.
Well, I think we need him in anyway.
Pardon me?
Well, yes.
We need Poilievre in anyway.
You are not in that undecided in the polls every month. Yeah. But but Mel, continue your thought, right? Because Pierre Poilievre was asked the other day, like, Trudeau's being criticized for a plan. Poilievre says we need a plan. They said, what is your plan? Mm-hmm. And he talked about ending carbon tax and emissions caps. None of those address the migration and fentanyl issues at the border that Donald Trump says he's concerned about, right? So, like, you know, it is unclear to me how Pierre, and maybe Fred can enlighten us in a bit, how Pierre Poilievre would necessarily approach President Trump if this inevitability does come to pass.
Right. And a lot of those same issues are issues that we're facing and feeling here in Canada, right? And the same kind of explanation as, oh, we're going to have to talk to the Americans so that they deal with this. So I don't know how, if that's, you know, what Pierre Poilievre's plan is, how that makes it better. I feel like at every opportunity that we've given Pierre Poilievre on, you know, the world stage so far, he's just kind of shown people that he wouldn't be up to the task. I take your point, Fred, about how polling, and that's pointing to folks believing that he would. So I don't know that that would be a good idea. I definitely don't think having a government caretaker mode over the next 2 months helps things. But then again, this government kind of seems asleep at the wheel for a lot of things. So a lot of ifs there.
No, there are. Okay, we have been trying to connect with my friend and colleague Josh Wingrove, who is a White House reporter and a politics reporter for Bloomberg based in Washington, D.C., but he's a good Alberta boy who was based here in Ottawa when I first moved here from Newfoundland and Labrador. And we've reached Josh now on the phone because Josh is assigned to cover President-elect Donald Trump and happens to be in Florida tonight. Josh, it's Cochrane. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Good evening. How are you?
Good to talk to you, man. Listen, you went out to the airport to check and see if it was, in fact, the Prime Minister and Dominic LeBlanc, as we've been reporting. What can you tell us? What's the latest from the area around Mar-a-Lago, where you're stationed right now?
Yeah, it's all very cloak and dagger here, and that's been the case over the recent couple of weeks. You know, people are only kind of finding out who visits Trump when it shows up on social media, or you spot them one way or the other. And in this case, Trudeau landed about 5:45 in one of the small Canadian planes. A motorcade was there to collect him. He spotted him. You could see him kind of as they drove out, and he's here, as we understand it, and I think as your reporting says, to do dinner with the president-elect, you know, joining a list of people that is included in the past week. For instance, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, of course, is hanging around Mar-a-Lago a lot. This is where Trump is sort of holding court. And so for Trudeau, he follows on the Argentinian president, Javier Milei, and others as political leaders who either have come or I'm sure are banging down the door to try to come. And of course, hanging over all this is the question of that tariff threat.
Right. And Josh, we're showing a picture, I believe, that you took and posted on Twitter of the, I think that's the Challenger that landed in West Palm Beach earlier today. The cloak and dagger nature of this, Josh, is... Look, the Prime Minister's office went very, very, very silent once people noticed that his plane was headed to Florida. Is this a Trump thing around this? Is this something that Team Trump is kind of insisting on as people come to Mar-a-Lago to see the president-elect in this in his return?
It depends on the moment and the vibe, really. Yeah, broadly speaking, the Trump team has not been saying much publicly, certainly not announcing it beforehand. But you know, as an example, the other night they declined comment on whether Zuckerberg was there, but then one of Trump's allies went on TV and said, yeah, of course he was there. So it depends on whether they say it aloud or not. So I expect we'll have some sort of confirmation after this dinner, one way or the other, from one camp or both. I guess we'll see. But, you know, for Trudeau, you know, it's been a few years now since I've covered him, but I would imagine that his goal is the same as any prime minister's goal, which is to try to get in, make sort of face-to-face contacts and hope that they can do something to convince Trump that the border is not a problem and that these tariffs don't need to be enacted. Trump is, of course, facing some modest domestic pressure not to enact them, and or from people who think it's simply a bluff. But as we've seen many times with him, he threatens tariffs. Sometimes they go on, sometimes they don't. And, you know, right now this one does seem a bit up in the air. He did speak with Mexico's president as well and issued a post on Truth Social, his social media platform, that seemed to indicate he was maybe backing away a little bit from the threat, but it's not clear.
Okay, so Josh, we're showing some video that you took. I believe that's the Prime Minister's motorcade leaving the airport. He landed in daylight. He'll be dining after dark because the sun has gone down there in Florida. But look, you cover politics, and with Bloomberg, obviously, there's a big business and economic focus to your work. The 25% tariff, nobody who talks about it says it makes any sense for American consumers or for American businesses. It certainly makes no sense for Canadian and Mexicans to have that happen, given the devastation it would cause to prices, to jobs, to the economy. You know, at minimum half a point off GDP to 5 percentage points or higher based on the 25% thing. Well, what is the sense of how serious Trump is with this? I know he did it with steel and aluminum, but this is on everything at its two biggest trading partners and most reliable trading partners and allies on the continent. I mean, do people think they can talk him out of it, or were we back in the nobody really knows what Donald Trump is going to do state of existence?
Would want to rule anything out with Trump. It does seem like some folks believe that this is more of a threat than a plan right now in terms of observers, but we just simply don't know. So we're reading Trump's posts to try to, find whatever tea leaves we can in them. You're right, 25%, which of course is a tax on American companies, American importers, and on things like, if he doesn't do exemptions, which is what the reporting is, on things like, of course, crude oil, food, key product categories that would hit inflation for Americans. So all that would, indicate that he would be unlikely to proceed with it, or at least that the people pushing against it would have a case to make for him. But he does like tariffs as a negotiating tactic. He's spoken at length about this, including a couple of months ago with Bloomberg's editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, where he said tariff is his favorite word in the dictionary. He likes forcing people to the table, and as we sit here in West Palm Beach, that's exactly what's happened, of course. Trudeau is bound to take this seriously. He's here. There's, going to be pressure domestically for Trudeau to pledge something on the border, and of course, as Canadian viewers know well, the border with Canada is nowhere near the issue that the border with Mexico is. So it's a shorter hill to climb probably for the Prime Minister, although a much longer border. But that's sort of, Trump's allies might see this meeting and say, this is vindication of his strategy. He threatens these things. People are forced to respond and come to the table. And if there is some sort of deal, Trump will take credit on that. So he sees it. Even if he doesn't impose tariffs, he will argue that it was all part of a strategy and all profit, essentially, in getting what he wanted, which is pledges of actions on the border.
Okay, Josh, there's one more question before I let you go. I think it's telling that the Prime Minister, of all the cabinet ministers he could have brought with him, he brought Dominic LeBlanc, who is the Public Safety Minister, who obviously have direct responsibility for the border, but also has some of the best, shall we say, glad handling and political skills of anyone in the Trudeau government. I think that's why he's called upon for a lot of politically difficult situations that rely on relationships to be managed. What kind of, do we have a clear sense of what it is they could demonstrate to Trump to show that they're taking the border more seriously? Because, there is this sense in Canada that it is not the problem. The Mexican border is, as you pointed out. But Wab Kinew, the Premier of Manitoba, said you can't argue your way out of this with facts. You got to show something to satisfy the demand here. I don't know what Trump expects in terms of Canada stopping people going into the U.S. illegally. That's the U.S.'s job. Though fentanyl and stuff is a little bit easier to see because the drugs are illegal everywhere. Do we even have a clear sense of what it is Trump would want to see that would satisfy his concerns that Canada took him seriously and responded enough?
I think that anything that can be held up as a win for Trump is something that the Canadian government would be wise to raise. Obviously, the backstory here, which most Americans won't know, but Canadians do know, is that there's been a long-running question about immigration more broadly in Canada that has led to announcements in recent months from the Trudeau government. I imagine Trudeau will mention all of that, but he's got to walk carefully here, David. I mean, I'm not as young as I used to be, so which means I'm old enough to do these interviews and say, I remember when. And I remember when there was the G7 in Charlevoix where Trump got really mad about Trudeau holding a press conference and ripped up the communique as he flew away from Quebec. So Trudeau is part of this, has to A, stick, the landing or not during this meeting, but B, remember Trump consumes so much of what he takes in through television. And so part of negotiating with him is the public-facing part of it as well.
Yeah, I remember that G7. He was on his way to Asia to meet with Kim Jong-un, I believe, and he blew up the G7 consensus with a tweet from the sky. All right, Josh, look, man, thanks. It's good. We miss you. It's always good to talk to you. Thanks for being with us today. It's Josh Wingrove with Bloomberg, who is in Florida for us tonight. All right, thanks, Josh. All right, joining us here at the round table is Rosemary Barton, our chief political correspondent, because, you know, when the president and the prime minister are meeting, Rosie, it's a big day in Canada-U.S. relations and in politics. I don't know what you've been doing while I have been on the air. I mean, what are your thoughts on where we are? What do you know about where we are?
You know, I was just thinking about the day after the election, the American election. We were waiting around to get word of whether Justin Trudeau had spoken to Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And we would see the list of people he had spoken to. You know, Narendra Modi, someone in Turkey, Orban. He had spoken to all these different leaders. And still Justin Trudeau hadn't got a phone call. It wasn't until, I think, close to 8 o'clock that night, the following night, that he finally got on the phone with Donald Trump, and by all accounts, it was a great conversation. This is, I believe, the first now G7 leader to meet with Donald Trump. So he may have waited a long time for a phone call, but he sure got a meeting pretty quickly, face to face. And I think, by all accounts, that is at least a partial win for the Prime Minister tonight. He gets to sit down at a table with him and try to explain the differences between Canada and Mexico, the things, as Josh was talking about, that Canada has been doing even before Donald Trump was elected, and the things that they are now planning to do around the border, further securing the border. I think what we know about Donald Trump is he wants people to come and meet with him. He does want that. He wants them to show up at his dinner table.
At Mar-a-Lago.
And take a meeting. He will feel impressed by that. He will be flattered that Justin Trudeau came down to do that and speak with him directly. And he will listen to what he's saying. Now, whether it will change anything dramatically, I don't know. And obviously, that's the next bar that the Prime Minister has to clear. Yeah. Does he manage to get him to back down immediately, partially, or does he just get back on his radar? Because they have had a relationship that's up and down. Right now, they seem to be up. And we'll see whether this dinner helps things. But I do think that it is hugely significant that he's in the room with him, that he's able to make this case directly to him, and that he can play to some of the things that we know Donald Trump likes to hear about. You know, one of the things from that first phone call that I heard about was that he talked about how his own dad had made a return to politics, just like Donald Trump. Well, that brought up a whole, conversation about how much Donald Trump liked his dad, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's not as though the Prime Minister has no idea who he's dealing with. And we'll see tonight whether he has a really good idea or just a partially good idea about how to handle the president-elect.
Okay, we've kept Greg, Fred, and Mel longer than we intended, so I'm going to just get final thoughts from them and let you guys go catch the end of the Chiefs-Raiders game. Greg, a win to be in the room, but it's not a win unless it leads to a positive outcome, right? Because if he goes there and it doesn't work, there's a risk there for the Prime Minister, right, if he can't change Trump's mind? Yeah,
but I would say to Rosie's point that President Trump likes people to come and pay homage, show up, and that goes a long way. And in addition to the phone call, there was another phone call in July after the assassination attempt. I think the Toronto Star reported this. You didn't see it a lot, but the description of the conversation between Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump was described as warm. Yeah. So I think the old line is showing up is half the battle. I think that's really significant. Quickly, David, the other thing is the Trudeau cabinet kept very quiet about Trump. In the UK, they have a very different situation where there's a lot of cabinet members and MPs in the government that had said things about President Trump, and now they're in government and they have to deal with the United States. That's very awkward. The Canadian government does not have that situation.
Well, they did, Fred, and the MAGA, Donald Trump, right-wing stuff, they were using it to attack Pierre Poilievre, months back. I don't think that's a line of attack we're going to see resurrected. Certainly not between now and January 20th, right?
Yeah, it's a lot riskier now, given the situation we're in. What I'm going to be looking for tonight, what's going to be interesting, what's coming out of this in terms of what is Justin Trudeau going going to say and what's Donald Trump going to say, and are they the same thing? We had the Mexican...
If Trump says 35%, we're in a lot of trouble.
Whatever. We had the Mexican president this week, right? We had two very different accounts about that conversation. So that's going to be interesting to see, will they have the same account?
Yes, the readouts, as we call them in the lingo, will be interesting to see if there's alignment there. Mel, your last thoughts on this. What do you make on what we heard from Josh, Rosie, where we are now that we know that Trudeau is definitely meeting with President-elect Trump tonight? Oh, I'm not hearing Mel. Just one sec there, Melanie. Just one sec. All right. We got her? No, I don't hear her. Well, we can't. It can't be final thoughts if we can't hear the thoughts. So we got to sort this out quick. We're having an audio. Oh, sorry, Melanie. I don't know what's going on there. We don't. All right. I
can hear you.
Oh,
yeah.
There we go. We got you. Mel, I didn't want you to think we were cutting you out like Doug Ford wants to cut out Mexico. You go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
I appreciate it. No, what I was just saying quickly is, I hadn't considered what Rosie just shared about how the Prime Minister is the first world leader to sit down with
G7 leader. G7 leader.
The G7 leader, sorry, to sit down with Donald Trump. So I think that's a good point, and that's important to note. I feel like I haven't been surprised by this government in a really long time, and this surprised me today in a good way. So hopefully we hear some good news. I think next steps, to Fred's point, are really important, and what we hear the Prime Minister say to people also coming out of this, so that folks feel like their Prime Minister is working on something, will be important.
Okay, Melanie Richer, Fred Delory, Greg McEachern, thank you. I look forward to this every Friday, and we had a whole plan, and then the Prime Minister went to Florida.